The rain hit the Texas dirt like bullets from heaven, turning the dusty road into a river of mud. Margaret Sullivan pressed her face against the cold metal bars of the prison wagon, watching the storm grow stronger with each passing minute. Her hands shook, not from the cold, but from the plan that had been forming in her mind for weeks. "Keep your head down, Sullivan," barked Guard Wilson, his voice barely heard over the thunder. "We got work to do, rain or no rain." Margaret had been part of this chain gang for 6 long months. 6 months of breaking rocks under the burning sun, 6 months of sleeping on concrete floors, 6 months of being treated like an animal. All for a crime she never committed. Her educated voice and gentle manners meant nothing here. The guards saw only the black and white stripes of her prison uniform. The wagon stopped with a jolt. Through the storm, Margaret could barely make out the highway construction site where they would spend another day moving rocks and digging ditches. But today was different. Today the storm was her friend. "Move it, ladies!" Wilson shouted, fumbling with his keys as rain soaked through his coat. "We ain't got all day." Margaret's heart pounded as she stepped down from the wagon. The other women in her group looked miserable, their shoulders hunched against the rain. But Margaret felt alive for the first time in months. She had noticed something the guards had in the old drainage ditch that ran along the eastern edge of the worksite. In dry weather, it was just a shallow creek. But with this rain, it would be deep enough to hide in. The work began as it always did. Pick up rocks, move them to the pile, pick up more rocks. The guards huddled under a makeshift shelter, occasionally shouting orders but mostly trying to stay dry. Margaret worked steadily, moving closer to the ditch with each trip. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder so loud it made the ground shake. In that moment, when the guards ducked their heads and the other prisoners stopped to look at the storm, Margaret made her move. She dropped her rock and ran. The ditch was deeper than she had hoped, the water rushing fast and cold. She gasped as it hit her chest, but kept moving. Behind her, she heard Wilson's whistle and angry shouts. But the storm was too loud, the rain too heavy. By the time they organized a search, she was already half a mile downstream. The next 3 days were the hardest of Margaret's life. She followed the water, knowing it would lead her away from the prison and the roads where they would be looking for her. Her prison stripes were torn and dirty, offering little protection against the thorns and branches that scratched her skin. Her hands, already raw from months of hard labor, began to bleed as she climbed over rocks and fallen trees. Hunger gnawed at her stomach. She tried eating berries she found along the way, but most made her sick. The rain had stopped, but the nights were cold, and she had nothing to keep her warm except the hope that somewhere ahead lay freedom. On the second night, she found shelter in a small cave. As she sat there, shivering and alone, she thought about the life she had lost. She had been a schoolteacher in Dallas, respected by her students and their parents. She had dreams of maybe getting married someday, of having children of her own to teach and love. All of that was gone now, destroyed by lies and greed, the wealthy family she had worked for. The Ashfords had trusted her with their money and their secrets, but their son, Robert, had been stealing from his own father to pay gambling debts. When the money went missing, it was easier to blame the poor schoolteacher than to admit their golden boy was a thief. They had connections, lawyers, influence. Margaret had nothing but the truth, and in 1938 Texas, that wasn't enough, but she couldn't think about that now. She had to keep moving, keep believing that somewhere ahead there was a chance for a new life. By the 3rd day, Margaret was barely walking. Her legs shook with each step, and the world seemed to spin around her. She had found a small stream and followed it, hoping it would lead to a town or at least a farm where she might find help. But as the sun rose higher, she realized she couldn't go much further. That's when she saw it. A simple wooden fence, and beyond it, the most beautiful sight she had ever seen. A well, just a plain stone well with a wooden bucket hanging from a rope, but to Margaret it looked like salvation itself. She stumbled toward it, her vision blurring. The fence was low enough to climb, though it took all her remaining strength. She fell more than climbed over it, landing hard on the other side. The well was only 50 feet away. But it might as well have been 50 miles. Margaret crawled the last few yards, her hands leaving bloody prints on the grass. She reached up, grasping the rope, and pulled the bucket down. The water was clear and cold, the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. She drank deeply, then splashed water on her face, washing away 3 days of dirt and fear. That's when she heard the footsteps. Jake Morrison had been up since before dawn, as was his habit. At 32, he had been running his family's ranch for 3 years, ever since his father's death. It wasn't easy work, especially with cattle prices falling and the bank breathing down his neck, but it was honest work. He believed in honest work. He was walking out to check the fence line when he saw her. At first, he thought it was just a bundle of old clothes someone had thrown away. But as he got closer, he realized it was a woman, collapsed by his well. Jake approached carefully. The woman was young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair matted with dirt and leaves. Her clothes were torn and stained, and he could see they were prison stripes. An escaped convict right here on his property. His first instinct was to go get his rifle, maybe ride into town for the sheriff. But something stopped him. The woman looked up at him, and he saw her eyes. Not the hard, mean eyes he expected from a criminal, but eyes full of fear and desperate hope. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm not idea single quotes. Jake knelt down beside her, noting the way she spoke. This wasn't the voice of a hardened criminal. This was an educated woman, someone who had known better days. "Ma'am," he said gently, "you're on my property. I can see you're in trouble." Margaret tried to sit up, but her strength was gone. "I know how this looks," she said, tears mixing with the dirt on her face. "But I'm not what you think. I'm innocent." "I was a teacher." Jake studied her face. He had grown up around ranch hands and drifters, and he knew how to read people. This woman was scared, hurt, and desperate, but she wasn't dangerous. Not to him, anyway. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. The question caught Margaret off guard. She had expected him to tie her up, to send for the law. She had not expected kindness. I don't remember," she admitted. Jake looked around. His nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and the road to town was even further. No one would know if he helped her, at least not right away. And something in his heart told him that helping her was the right thing to do. "Come on," he said, standing and offering her his hand. "Let's get you cleaned up and fed. Then we'll figure out what comes next." Margaret stared at his outstretched hand, hardly believing what she was hearing. For 6 months, she had been treated like an animal. Now this stranger, this cowboy, was offering her the first kindness she had known since her arrest. She took his hand, and he helped her to her feet. As they walked slowly toward his house, Margaret felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. The first week passed like a careful dance between two strangers. Jake had given Margaret a small room in the back of his house, nothing fancy but clean and private. She slept for almost 2 straight days, her body finally able to rest after months of fear and exhaustion. When she woke up, she found fresh clothes laid out for her, an old shirt and pants that had belonged to Jake's father, altered to fit her smaller frame. "You didn't have to do this," Margaret said when she found Jake mending fence in the morning sun. The clothes were simple but clean, and for the first time in months, she felt human again. Jake looked up from his work, hammer in hand. "Couldn't let you walk around in those prison stripes. Might scare the cattle," he said with a small smile. Margaret touched the fabric of the shirt. It was soft cotton, worn from years of honest work. "I'll pay you back somehow," she said quietly. "No need for that," Jake replied, returning to his fence post. "Just get your strength back." But Margaret couldn't just sit idle. On the 3rd day, she appeared at the barn door while Jake was milking his cow. "Let me help," she said. Jake paused, his hand still on the cow's udder. "You don't need to." "I want to," Margaret interrupted. "I can't just hide in that room forever. And I know how to work." Something in her voice made Jake look at her more carefully. She stood straight despite her recent ordeal, her chin raised with quiet dignity. This wasn't the posture of a hardened criminal. "You ever milk a cow before?" he asked. Margaret smiled for the first time since he'd found her. I grew up on a small farm before my life changed. My father always said idle hands were the devil's workshop. Jake moved aside, gesturing toward the cow. Her name's Bessie. She's gentle but particular about how she likes to be milked. As Margaret sat on the milking stool, her hands naturally found the right rhythm. The milk flowed steady and smooth into the bucket. Jake watched in surprise. This was no city woman pretending to know farm work. Her movements were confident. Practiced. Where'd you learn to milk like that? He asked. Iowa, Margaret said, not looking up from her work. My father had a small dairy farm. I did this every morning before school until I was 16. What happened when you were 16? Margaret's hands paused for just a moment. My father died. Farm went to the bank. I moved to Dallas to live with my aunt and finish my education. Jake heard the pain in her voice and decided not to push further. But he was learning that Margaret Sullivan was full of surprises. Over the following days, she proved it again and again. She could handle his horses like she'd been born to it, calming his most skittish mare with gentle words and patient hands. She helped him repair the chicken coop, her fingers working quickly to weave new wire into the fence. She even cooked dinner one evening, turning his simple supplies into a meal better than anything he'd tasted in months. You sure you're not some kind of miracle worker? Jake asked one evening as they sat on his porch after a day of hard work. Margaret laughed. A sound that surprised them both. Just a woman who learned to make do. When you don't have much, you learn to make the most of what you have. As the sun set over the Texas plains, Jake found himself studying her profile. In the soft light, with her hair clean and pulled back, she looked nothing like the desperate woman he'd found by his well. She looked like what she claimed to be, a schoolteacher, educated and refined, but with the practical skills of someone who'd known hard times. Can I ask you something? Jake said carefully. Margaret nodded, though her body tensed slightly. What did they say you did? The law, Margaret was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the hurt underneath. They said I stole money from the family I worked for, the Ashfords. I was their children's private tutor, and I helped Mrs. Ashford with her correspondence and household accounts. $500 went missing from Mr. Ashford's office safe. Did you take it? Margaret turned to look at him directly. No, I didn't, but I knew who did. Jake waited, sensing there was more to the story. Their son, Robert. He was 25. Handsome, charming when he wanted to be. But he had a gambling problem. I saw him coming home drunk several times, talking about debts he owed to dangerous people. I found betting slips in his coat pocket when I was helping with the laundry. Why didn't you tell them? I tried, but who were they going to believe? Their golden boy or the hired help? Robert was smart enough to make it look like I had done it. He even planted some of the money in my room, said he'd seen me acting suspicious. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. So they just sent you to prison? No trial? No chance to defend yourself? Oh, there was a trial, Margaret said bitterly. Lasted all of 2 days. The Ashfords had money, influence, the best lawyers. I had a court-appointed attorney who met me 15 minutes before the trial started. The judge was a friend of Mr. Ashford's from their gentlemen's club. That's not justice, Jake said firmly. No, Margaret agreed. It's not. But it's the law, at least for people like me. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Finally, Jake spoke. I believe you. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you work hard without being asked. I know you're gentle with animals and careful with my things. I know you haven't tried to steal anything or hurt anyone, even though you could have. That tells me more than any courtroom ever could. Margaret wiped her eyes, overwhelmed by his faith in her. Why are you helping me? You could get in serious trouble if they find out. Jake was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. My father always said that when you see someone in trouble, you help them. Doesn't matter who they are or where they come from, it's just the right thing to do. But this is different. I'm a fugitive. You're a woman who got dealt a bad hand. Jake said simply. Doesn't mean you deserved it. As the days passed, Margaret learned more about Jake's own struggles. The ranch had been in his family for 2 generations, but it was barely surviving. Cattle prices were down and he was behind on his mortgage payments. Making matters worse, a land developer named William Hartley had been pressuring him to sell. He's been buying up all the small ranches in the area? Jake explained one morning as they worked together to repair a water trough. Offers them just enough to cover their debts, then turns the land into developments for rich folks from the city. What happens if you don't sell? Jake's jaw tightened. He's got connections at the bank. Says he can make sure they call in my loan early. I'd lose everything my father and grandfather built. Margaret watched him work, noting the pride in his movements as he handled the tools and materials. This land wasn't just his business, it was his identity, his legacy. There has to be something you can do, she said. Maybe if I could get the other small ranchers to stand together, we might have enough influence to fight back. But most of them are too scared or too desperate to take the risk. As they worked side by side, Margaret found herself thinking about Jake's problem more than her own. Here was a good man facing his own kind of injustice, and she wanted to help him the way he had helped her that evening. As they shared another meal on the porch, Margaret made a decision. I want to help you fight Hartley, she said. Jake looked up from his plate. Margaret, you can't get involved in this. You're already in enough trouble. I was a teacher, Jake. I know how to research, how to write letters, how to organize people. Maybe I can find something that will help. It's too dangerous. If anyone sees you, then we'll be careful. But I can't just hide here forever, taking your charity and giving nothing back. Let me help you save your ranch. Jake studied her face in the lamplight. She was asking to risk her freedom for his problems, and he couldn't understand why. This isn't your fight, he said softly. Margaret reached across the table and touched his hand. You made it my fight when you decided to help me. We're in this together now. As their hands touched, both felt something shift between them. What had started as a rescue was becoming something deeper, something that scared and thrilled them. Both. They were 2 people fighting their own battles against injustice, but they no longer had to fight alone, outside. The night sounds of the ranch continued their ancient song, but inside the small house, 2 hearts were learning to beat as one. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning when Jake rode into town for supplies. He was loading flour and coffee into his wagon when he saw the poster. There, nailed to the post office wall, was a drawing of a woman's face. The artist had done a good job, good enough that Jake's heart stopped when he recognized Margaret's features staring back at him. Wanted, dangerous female escapee, read the bold letters across the top. Below Margaret's picture, smaller text described her as armed and extremely dangerous, with a reward of $200 for information leading to her capture. Jake tore the poster down, crumpling it in his fist. $200 was more money than most folks in town saw in 6 months. If anyone recognized Margaret, they wouldn't hesitate to turn her in. Problem with that poster, Jake? Jake spun around to find Sheriff Tom Bradley standing behind him, a knowing look in his eyes. Bradley was a tall man with a gray mustache and the kind of steady gaze that made guilty men confess without being asked. Just wondering what kind of woman could be dangerous enough to warrant this kind of attention, Jake said, trying to keep his voice casual. The kind that killed a guard during her escape, Bradley replied, watching Jake's face carefully. Shot him in cold blood, they say. Been on the run for 3 weeks now? Jake's blood ran cold. He knew Margaret wasn't capable of murder, but how could he say that without revealing too much? She headed this way? Jake asked. Could be anywhere by now. But I'm checking every ranch, every farm, every hiding place within 50 miles. Woman like that needs food and shelter. Someone's helping her, whether they know it or not? Bradley's eyes never left Jake's face. You seen any strangers around your place lately? Anyone asking for work or a place to stay? No, sir, Jake said, the lie burning in his throat. Just me and the cattle. Well, keep your eyes open. And if you see anything suspicious, you let me know right away. $200 is a lot of Money, but it ain't worth dying for. Jake rode home with his heart pounding. Margaret hadn't killed anyone, he was sure of that. But the authorities were painting her as a murderer, making the reward bigger and the danger greater. Every person in the county would be looking for her now. When he got home, he found Margaret in the garden behind the house, pulling weeds from the tomato plants. She looked up with a smile when she heard his horse, but the expression died when she saw his face. "What's wrong?" she asked, wiping dirt from her hands. Jake showed her the crumpled poster. Margaret's face went white as she read it. "I never killed anyone," she whispered. "I never even saw a guard get hurt during my escape. This is all lies." "I know that," Jake said, taking her hands in his. "But the whole county thinks you're a murderer now? They've doubled the reward money." Margaret sank down on the porch steps, the weight of her situation crushing down on her. "I have to leave. Tonight I can't put you in this kind of danger." "You're not going anywhere," Jake said firmly. "We'll figure this out together." But even as he said it, Jake wondered how long they could hide. The net was closing around them, and he didn't know how much time they had left. The next morning brought a new problem. Jake was fixing a broken fence when he saw a buggy approaching from the east. He recognized it immediately. It belonged to his neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a woman who knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing it. "Morning, Jake," she called out, not bothering to climb down from her buggy. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Yes, ma'am," Jake replied, continuing his work and hoping she'd move along, but Mrs. Henderson had other plans. "I was just telling my husband yesterday," I said, "Henry, that Jake Morrison's been working awfully hard lately. Almost like he's got help around the place." Jake's hammer missed the nail, nearly hitting his thumb. "Just keeping busy, Mrs. Henderson." "Oh, I'm sure you are. But I could have sworn I saw someone else working in your garden yesterday." "A woman, maybe? From a distance, of course?" Jake's mind raced. How much had she seen? How much did she suspect? "Must have been the light playing tricks on you," he said. "You know how shadows can look like people sometimes?" Mrs. Henderson smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh yes, shadows can be very deceiving, but I do have good eyesight for a woman my age. Always have." She gathered her reins, preparing to leave. "You know, Jake, if you ever need help with anything, cleaning, cooking, that sort of thing, my daughter Patricia is looking for work. She's a good Christian girl, not the kind to get mixed up in any trouble." The message was clear. Mrs. Henderson suspected something, and she wasn't going to let it go that evening. Jake told Margaret about the conversation while they worked together preparing dinner. Her hands shook slightly as she cut vegetables, but her voice was steady. "How long do you think we have?" she asked. "Not long. Maybe a few days, maybe a week if we're lucky." Margaret set down her knife and turned to face him. "Jake, I need you to listen to me. I can't let you lose everything because of me. Your ranch, your reputation, maybe even your freedom. It's too much to ask." "You're not asking," Jake said. "I'm choosing." "But why? You barely know me. I'm just a woman who showed up at your well half dead. Why would you risk everything for someone like me?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but certain. "Because I love you." The words hung in the air between them. Margaret felt her heart skip a beat, even as tears filled her eyes. "You can't love me," she said. "I'm a fugitive, a woman with no future. Loving me will only bring you pain." Jake stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. "Too late for that. I've been falling for you since the day I found you. The way you work without complaining, the way you're gentle with the animals, the way you make me laugh even when everything seems hopeless. I love your strength and your kindness and your stubborn determination to help me fight my battles." Margaret leaned into his touch, allowing herself to feel the warmth of his love, even as her practical mind told her it was impossible. "I love you too," she whispered, "but love isn't enough. Not when the whole world is looking for me." "Then we'll make our own world," Jake said and kissed her. For a moment, everything else faded away. The danger, the fear, the uncertainty, none of it mattered. There was only this man who had saved her life and stolen her heart, and the impossible dream that somehow they could build a life together, but the dream was shattered by the sound of hoofbeats in the yard. "Quick," Jake whispered, pulling away from her, the cellar, now. Margaret hurried to the kitchen, lifting the trapdoor that led to the small cellar where Jake stored his canned goods and winter supplies. She dropped down into the darkness just as Jake closed the door over her head. The knock on the front door was firm and official. Jake took a deep breath, smoothed his hair, and opened it. Sheriff Bradley stood on the porch, his hat in his hands, but his eyes alert and suspicious. "Evening, Jake. Mind if I come in?" "Of course not, Sheriff." "What brings you out this way so late?" Bradley stepped inside, looking around the small house with the practiced eye of a lawman. "Got a report from one of your neighbors?" "Says they might have seen something unusual around your property." Jake's heart pounded, but he kept his voice steady. "What kind of unusual?" "The kind that might be connected to our escaped prisoner. Mrs. Henderson seems to think you might have a woman staying here. Says she saw someone in your garden." "Mrs. Henderson sees a lot of things," Jake said. "Most of them in her imagination." Bradley smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Maybe so, but I have to check out every lead." "You understand." The sheriff moved through the house slowly, opening doors, looking in corners. Jake followed, trying to appear helpful while his mind screamed warnings. The cellar door was right there in the kitchen floor, barely hidden under a thin rug. "Nice place you got here," Bradley said, pausing in the kitchen. "Must get lonely, though, living out here all by yourself." "I keep busy," Jake replied. Bradley's boot scraped against the rug, and Jake's blood turned to ice. Below them, Margaret crouched in the darkness, hardly daring to breathe. "What's under here?" Bradley asked, bending down to lift the corner of the rug. "Just the cellar," Jake said, his mouth dry as dust. "Want to take a look?" He reached for the handle, praying that Margaret had found a good hiding spot among the shelves and barrels. But just as his fingers touched the wood, Bradley straightened up. "No need, I can see it's just storage space." He looked directly at Jake. "You know what the penalty is for helping a fugitive?" "Yes, sir." "Good, because I'd hate to see a good man like you throw his life away for someone who isn't worth it." Bradley put his hat back on and headed for the door. "You think of anything that might help us find this woman, you let me know. And Jake, be careful who you trust. Sometimes the people who seem the most innocent are the most dangerous." After the sheriff left, Jake waited a full 10 minutes before opening the cellar door. Margaret climbed out, her face pale but determined. "You have to turn me in," she said without preamble. "What?" "You heard what he said. You could go to prison for helping me." "I won't let that happen." Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I told you before, you're not going anywhere." "Jake, be reasonable. This can't end well. Every day I stay here, the danger gets worse. Then we'll face it together," he said. "I'm not giving up on you. I'm not giving up on us." The end came on a Thursday morning, bright and clear, the kind of day that should have been filled with hope. Margaret was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, humming softly to herself as she worked. She had been doing this simple task for weeks now, but today felt different. Today felt like the last time Jake was in the barn, checking on a sick calf when he heard the thunder of hoofbeats. Not just one horse, but several, moving fast and with purpose. He dropped his tools and ran toward the house. His heart already sinking. Sheriff Bradley rode into the yard first, followed by 2 deputies and a man in a dark suit who could only be a federal marshal. Behind them came Mrs. Henderson in her buggy, her face twisted with what might have been guilt or satisfaction. "Margaret, run!" Jake shouted, but it was too late. She stood frozen by the clothesline, a wet sheet still in her hands as the lawmen surrounded her. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. After weeks of living in fear, the moment had finally come. "Margaret Sullivan," the marshal said, dismounting from his horse. "You're under arrest for escape from custody and murder of a prison guard." "She never killed anyone," Jake said, stepping between them and Margaret. "That's a lie." "Step back, Jake, Sheriff," Bradley warned, his hand moving to his gun. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Margaret dropped the sheet and walked forward, her head held high. It's all right, Jake. I knew this day would come. The marshal pulled out a pair of handcuffs, the metal gleaming in the morning sun. As he snapped them around Margaret's wrists, she looked back at Jake with eyes full of love and sorrow. I don't regret a single day, she said softly. Thank you for showing me what kindness looks like. This isn't over, Jake called out as they loaded her into the wagon. I'll find a way to help you. But as the wagon rolled away, carrying the woman he loved back to a life of chains and concrete, Jake wondered if he was making a promise he couldn't keep. That afternoon, Jake rode into town with determination burning in his chest. He went straight to the bank, where he found Mr. Patterson, the bank president, counting money behind his desk. I need to speak with you, Jake said, his hat in his hands. Patterson looked up, his eyebrows raised. Jake Morrison, I heard you had some excitement at your place this morning. I need a loan, Jake said, ignoring the comment. Against my land. Your land? Patterson leaned back in his chair. Son, you're already behind on your payments. I can't give you more money when you can't pay back what you already owe. I'm not asking for charity, Jake said. I want to sell part of my land. The north section, maybe 200 acres, I need the money to hire a lawyer. Patterson's eyes narrowed. A lawyer? For what? For Margaret Sullivan. The woman they arrested today. She's innocent, and I'm going to prove it. Jake, that woman is a convicted murderer. She killed a guard during her escape. She's innocent, Jake repeated firmly. And I'm going to hire the best lawyer money can buy to prove it. Patterson stood up, shaking his head. You're making a mistake, son. That woman has you fooled. She's dangerous. The only dangerous thing here is letting an innocent woman go to prison for crimes she didn't commit. Patterson was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a document. There is one way I can help you. William Hartley made another offer on your property just yesterday. He'll buy your north section for $3,000. Cash? Jake's stomach turned. Hartley was the land developer who had been trying to buy out all the small ranchers. Selling to him felt like betrayal of everything his family had built, but if it meant saving Margaret, I'll take it, Jake said. Jake, think about what you're doing. Once you sell to Hartley, there's no going back. He'll use that land to pressure other ranchers to sell. Your neighbors won't forgive you. My neighbors let an innocent woman get arrested without lifting a finger, Jake replied. I can live with their anger better than I can live with my conscience. 2 days later, Jake walked into the law office of Attorney Charles Whitman in Dallas, carrying $3,000 in cash. Whitman was known as the best criminal lawyer in Texas, expensive but effective. Mr. Morrison, Whitman said, studying the money on his desk, I've heard about your case. You want me to defend a woman who was already convicted and then killed a guard while escaping? She didn't kill anyone, Jake said. And she was innocent of the original crime, too. Someone framed her. Whitman leaned back in his leather chair. Even if that's true, proving it will be nearly impossible. The original trial is over. The verdict was final. And now there's a new charge of murder. I don't care how hard it is. Jake said, I want you to take the case. Whitman looked at Jake for a long moment, then at the money. All right, Mr. Morrison, but I want you to understand something. This isn't just about proving innocence. We're fighting a system that doesn't like to admit its mistakes. The people who convicted her the first time won't want to be proven wrong. Can you win? I can try. But it will take time, and there are no guarantees. Jake stood up, shaking the lawyer's hand. Time is all I can give her. Please, help her. While Whitman began his investigation, Margaret sat in the county jail, awaiting trial for the murder charge. The cell was small and cold, with iron bars and a single window that let in a thin shaft of sunlight. She spent her days thinking about Jake, praying that he would forget her and move on with his life. But Jake hadn't forgotten. Every day he rode into town to meet with Whitman, bringing information about Margaret's character and her time on his ranch. He also visited the jail, though the sheriff only allowed him to see her once a week. You should go home, Margaret told him during one of these visits. Live your life. Find a good woman who can give you the normal life you deserve. You are the good woman, Jake said, gripping the bars that separated them. And I'm not giving up on you. Meanwhile, Whitman's investigation was turning up interesting information. The story about Margaret killing a guard during her escape didn't match the evidence. The guard who had supposedly been killed was actually alive and well, working at a prison in another state. Someone had deliberately spread false information to make her seem more dangerous. But the real breakthrough came when Whitman started looking into the original theft case. He traveled to Dallas and began asking questions about the Ashford family and their son Robert. What he found surprised him. Robert Ashford had been arrested 3 months earlier in New Orleans for running a gambling scheme. When the police searched his hotel room, they found evidence of several other thefts, including detailed notes about how he had framed Margaret for the missing money. He kept records, Whitman told Jake during one of their meetings. Detailed records of every crime he committed, including how he planted evidence in Margaret's room and bribed a witness to lie at her trial. That's enough to clear her, isn't it? Jake asked. It should be, but Robert Ashford is the son of a wealthy, powerful family. Getting him to testify against himself won't be easy. But luck was on their side. Robert Ashford was facing serious charges in New Orleans, and the prosecutor there was willing to make a deal. If Robert testified about his crimes in Texas, they would reduce his sentence in Louisiana. As news of the investigation spread through the county, something unexpected happened. People began to remember things differently. Mrs. Henderson, who had been the one to tip off the sheriff about Margaret's presence at Jake's ranch, came forward with new information. I've been thinking about that day I saw her in the garden, she told Whitman. She wasn't acting like a dangerous criminal. She was just working, taking care of the plants like she cared about them. A murderer wouldn't do that, would she? Other neighbors began to speak up too. The shopkeeper in town remembered Margaret from her visits with Jake, how polite and well-spoken she had been. The doctor who had treated Jake's sick calf recalled seeing her helping with the animal, gentle and knowledgeable. She helped me fix my fence one morning, said old Pete Crawford, Jake's closest neighbor. Didn't ask for payment, just saw I was struggling and offered to help. That's not the behavior of a hardened criminal. Even Sheriff Bradley began to have doubts. He had been a lawman for 20 years, and he prided himself on being able to read people. The woman he had arrested at Jake's ranch hadn't seemed like a killer. She had been scared and sad, but not dangerous. Maybe I was wrong about her, he admitted to Whitman one afternoon. She didn't fight when we arrested her, didn't try to run, just accepted it like she expected it. That's not how guilty people usually act. As the evidence mounted and the community's opinion began to shift, Jake felt hope for the first time in weeks, but he also knew that the real test was still to come. They had to prove Margaret's innocence in court, in front of a judge and jury who had already decided she was guilty. The trial was scheduled for the following month. Margaret would face the murder charge first, and if she was cleared of that, they would petition to have her original conviction overturned. We have a real chance, Whitman told Jake as they prepared for court. The evidence is strong, and the community is starting to support her. But trials are unpredictable. We have to be ready for anything. Jake nodded, his jaw set with determination. He had already given up part of his family's land to save the woman he loved. Now he would give up anything else necessary to see justice done. The courthouse in Dallas was packed on the morning of Margaret's trial. Word had spread throughout the county about the case, and people came from miles around to see justice being served. Some came hoping to see a murderer get what she deserved, but many others came because they had heard whispers that an innocent woman had been wrongly accused. Margaret sat at the defendant's table next to Attorney Whitman, wearing a simple blue dress that Jake had brought her. She looked thin and tired from her weeks in jail, but her back was straight and her eyes were clear. In the gallery behind her, Jake sat in the front row, his hat in his hands and his heart full of prayers. Judge Harrison called the court to order, his voice echoing through the crowded room. He was an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, known for being fair but tough. Margaret's fate was in his hands. This court will hear the case of the state of Texas versus Margaret Sullivan, he announced. The defendant is charged with the murder of a prison guard during her escape from custody. The prosecutor stood up first, a young man eager to make his name by convicting a famous fugitive. He painted a picture of Margaret as a dangerous criminal who would stop at nothing to gain her freedom. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, "the defendant is a convicted thief who killed an innocent man in cold blood. She may look harmless now, but she has proven herself capable of the worst kind of violence." But when Whitman stood up for the defense, the whole tone of the room changed. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm and confident, "I can prove that not only did Margaret Sullivan not kill anyone, but the guard she supposedly murdered is alive and well, working at a prison in Oklahoma." A murmur went through the courtroom. The prosecutor's face went pale. Whitman called his first witness, Guard Johnson from the Oklahoma State Prison. Johnson walked to the stand looking confused and very much alive. "State your name for the record," Whitman said. "Thomas Johnson." "Sir, I work as a guard at the Oklahoma State Prison. Are you the same Thomas Johnson who was reported killed during Margaret Sullivan's escape?" "Yes, sir, that's me, but as you can see, I'm very much alive. I was never even at that prison when she escaped. I've been working in Oklahoma for the past 2 years. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The prosecutor objected, but Judge Harrison overruled him. "Continue, Mr. Whitman," the judge said, his eyebrows raised with interest. Whitman's next witness was even more dramatic. Robert Ashford walked into the courtroom in handcuffs, flanked by 2 guards. He looked nothing like the confident young man who had once destroyed Margaret's life. Prison had changed him, made him thin and nervous. "Mr. Ashford," Whitman said, "do you know the defendant?" "Yes," Robert said quietly. "She used to work for my family." "And did you accuse her of stealing money from your father's safe?" Robert looked down at his hands. "Yes." "Did she steal that money?" "No," Robert said, his voice barely audible. "I did." The courtroom exploded. People stood up, shouting questions. Judge Harrison banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order," he shouted. "Order." In this court? When the room finally quieted, Whitman continued his questioning. Double quotes, "Mr. Ashford, can you tell this court exactly what you did?" Robert took a deep breath. "I stole $500 from my father's safe to pay gambling debts. When he noticed it was missing, I panicked. I planted some of the money in Margaret's room and told my parents I had seen her acting suspicious. And what happened then? My parents believed me. They called the police, and Margaret was arrested. I let her go to prison for something I did." Margaret felt tears streaming down her face. After all these months, someone was finally telling the truth. "Why are you confessing now?" Whitman asked. "Because I can't live with what I did anymore." Robert said, "Margaret was a good woman. She was kind to me, even when I was difficult. She didn't deserve what happened to her." The prosecutor tried to cross-examine Robert, but there was nothing he could do. The confession was clear and complete. Whitman's final witness was Jake. He walked to the stand looking nervous but determined. "Mr. Morrison," Whitman said, "you found the defendant on your property after her escape. Can you tell us about that?" Jake looked at Margaret, drawing strength from her eyes. "I found her collapsed by my well, half dead from thirst and exhaustion. She was scared and desperate, but she wasn't dangerous. Not to me, not to anyone." "How long did she stay on your property?" "About 6 weeks. She worked alongside me, helped with the animals, cooked meals. She was gentle and kind, nothing like the person described in these charges." "Did she ever threaten you or anyone else?" "No, sir. She was the most peaceful person I've ever known. She couldn't hurt a fly, much less kill a person." The prosecutor stood up. "But you hid a fugitive from justice. That's a crime." Jake looked him straight in the eye. "I helped an innocent woman who was being hunted for crimes she didn't commit. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty and proud of it." The courtroom buzzed with approval. Even some of the jury members were nodding. After closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. They were back in less than an hour. Have you reached a verdict? Judge Harrison asked. The foreman stood up. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of murder, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Margaret buried her face in her hands, sobbing with relief. Jake wanted to run to her, but he had to wait for the judge to finish. Furthermore, Judge Harrison said, banging his gavel for quiet, based on the evidence presented in this trial, I am ordering a full investigation into the original theft conviction. The defendant will remain free on her own recognizance while this matter is resolved. 2 weeks later, Margaret sat in the same courtroom for the hearing on her original conviction. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. The judge, who had originally sentenced her, was there, looking embarrassed and ashamed. After reviewing all the evidence, he said, including Mr. Ashford's confession and the testimony of multiple witnesses, I am overturning the original conviction. All charges against Margaret Sullivan are hereby dismissed. The court apologizes for the miscarriage of justice that occurred. Margaret was finally completely free. Outside the courthouse, Jake swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed and cried at the same time. It's over, he said. You're free. We're free. I can't believe it, Margaret said. After all this time, people finally know the truth. But their celebration was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Bradley walked up to them, his hat in his hands. Miss Sullivan, he said, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you, and I'm sorry. You were doing your job, Margaret said graciously. No, I was making assumptions. A good lawman looks for the truth, not just the easy answer. He turned to Jake. You're a good man, Morrison. You stood by her when nobody else would. As they walked back to Jake's wagon, they found a group of people waiting for them. The other small ranchers from the county had come to town for the trial, and they had something to say. Jake, said old Pete Crawford, we heard what you did. How you sold part of your land to hire a lawyer for Margaret. That took real courage. We also heard about your trouble with Hartley, added another rancher. We've been talking, and we want to help. Pete pulled out an envelope. We took up a collection. All the small ranchers in the county contributed. There's enough here to buy back your land from Hartley, with some left over to help you get back on your feet. Jake opened the envelope and saw more money than he had ever seen at one time. I can't take this, he said. Yes, you can, Pete said firmly. You showed us what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. Now it's our turn to stand up for you. Besides, added Mrs. Henderson, who had been standing quietly in the back, we all feel bad about how we treated Margaret. This is our way of making it right. 6 months later, on a beautiful spring morning, Margaret and Jake stood in front of the small church in town, surrounded by friends and neighbors. Margaret wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson had made for her, and Jake wore his best suit. Do you, Jake Morrison, take Margaret Sullivan to be your wife? Asked the preacher. I do, Jake said, his voice strong and clear. And do you, Margaret Sullivan, take Jake Morrison to be your husband? I do, Margaret said, her eyes shining with happiness. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. As they kissed, the whole congregation erupted in cheers. Even Sheriff Bradley was there, clapping and smiling. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch that was now their home. Jake had bought back his land from Hartley, and with the extra money from the community, he had been able to make improvements. The house was bigger now, with a proper kitchen and a room that would serve as Margaret's new schoolroom. I still can't believe this is real, Margaret said as they stood on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. It's real, Jake said, pulling her close. We're home. The next morning, Margaret opened her new school. Children from all over the county came to learn from the teacher who had survived prison and found justice. She taught them reading and writing, but more importantly, she taught them about standing up for what's right years later. When people talked about the story of Margaret and Jake, they didn't just remember it as a love story. They remembered it as a story about justice, about community, and about the power of doing